right? When they first designed the web, they only kind of designed it to expand as easily as possible, because basically, like, Tim Berners-Lee was terrified. Their biggest fear, you wouldn't believe it, like at the early days, was that no one was going to use it. They thought, like, how can we convince people to use this? Because it was just kind of like this fun, geeky thing between researchers at universities, and they wanted it, to build new cool stuff. And they didn't have anywhere near the kind of access to computation and programming that we do now. So pages took ages to load. The user experience was terrible. It was just really gimmicky. Okay. And so HTML was kind of created and optimized to just be connecting people as quick as possible. The early internet providers like AOL, you used to have to like connect a bank card in order to use it. So you paid for your usage. And so there was all this kind of infrastructure. It would have been possible in the early days to make it so that the more data you contribute to this, the more you get paid back. You could have just embedded it in the web. But it just didn't go that way, partially because they really wanted the web to expand as quick as possible. Okay, so they weren't looking at, if you were to post something, they weren't looking at how everyone else interacting with that picture, for example, they would also have to build connections back to that picture. Okay, so for example, let's go to the 90s or whatever, and I take a camcorder video of a protest, okay, or a politician's speech, and I managed somehow to put that. I spent 2 days loading that onto the web, okay, and then other people are now going to reshare that and chop it up and whatever. You could take a slice out of context, and it could kind of be like fake newsy. If they had created the web like how every other computer network should be created, with like nodes connecting so people can connect to that picture, they can take a copy of it. Anyone who shared that video or a slice of that video would have been able to just click on the original and get taken back and have context instantly, because that's how computer networks should be created. But they decided not to do that because they just wanted to like save the bandwidth, I guess, and just get people expansion. Likewise with payments, PayPal was one of the first big companies to try and get online payments. The cost of that just would not have worked for something like so many high volume of micropayments that it would take for every time you post, you to get a tiny, tiny share of the revenues from that. So for whatever reason, the internet infrastructure grew without these things. That's why in the last kind of 10 years or so, some of the biggest companies have been social networking companies that help you connect to people in both directions. A great example of this that you interact with every day probably is on LinkedIn. If someone looks at your account, you get a notification that they looked at it. Okay, because it's like you can't connect to one node and not know what's going on in the other. So what a data union can kind of function as is like a royalty company. Like when you post music or something to the radio, anyone who plays that song on the radio, they should be like paying a micropayment to the person that created it. And royalty agencies will go around and actually do the accounting and make sure that artists are getting paid for all the music that's in circulation around. That one day, and we kind of have an amazing amount of infrastructure to make this happen on the internet now, is organizations like ours. When someone takes a picture that you posted, or this podcast perhaps, and they take up clips and they repost it on Instagram, they could take what we say out of context and it would look like fake news. It would look like they stitched it together and they stitched us up somehow. But then a data union would come along and be repatriating you for the data sales or the ad revenue that they made from your content. And it would always be there as a link. So users could say, okay, well, that looks like a really controversial thing that Charlie or Dara said, but I can just click this on the link and it will take me right back to the original. And that's technically called like provenance. The internet should be like that. So a lot of fake news is just stuff that's out of context, okay, or it's kind of misappropriated or things like that. You could get rid of a whole chunk of that by just being able to click a button and going back to the original video and seeing it for yourself. But you can't do that because people just screen record and whatever. There's no way of tracking that. That's the same reason why it's very difficult to get paid properly for your data. And it's the same reason why it's very easy to spread misinformation.
That is, I think you highlighted the main issue. Whenever you see something, a clip or fake news, finding the original clip is always the hardest thing ever, right?
Yeah.
And to combat that, what do you think of what Elon Musk did with Twitter with community notes? Which is because you talked about this thing that it needs to be, it gets political, but with community notes, it's this great thing of you get different people from different political backgrounds to have to agree, and they'll also will usually post the original link. They're like, yeah, this isn't not true. Find the original video here, and then you can click on it and see it.
Totally. Like, I think that's literally how the internet should go. And I think data unions should be so involved in that. Yeah, massively. And that should be in any way kind of like decentralized wherever it can. I think community notes is genius.
Yeah. They should, I think, because Mark Zuckerberg stole a lot of ideas or got inspired, let's say. I think this is one of those things maybe he should be inspired by, but maybe he doesn't want to do that. But you know what? I think that Mark Zuckerberg is having a change, because going back to that letter that happened, just like last week, I think he is having a change of heart, and
he's like a Trump supporter now.
I think I think he's just inspired.
Seems that way almost.
Yeah, because the thing is, before, I think he was inspired by definitely the assassination attempt that was very patriotic.
Yeah,
and I think it's quite a big change from before. It was reported that he had invested 400 million in the Democratic Party, some crazy number.
Yeah.
Now he said he won't, do that. And in that letter, he did mention that he was pressured by, the government to, do the censorship.
Yeah.
And I think he is inspired by Elon Musk, a little bit, grow some balls. Now he's doing some MMA. He's growing some balls and saying, we don't have to listen. We don't have
Joe
to.
Rogan a couple of times.
Yeah. We don't have to listen to these guys. We can stand on some morals.